Well, hello. My name's Adrian Gilbert, and if you don't know who I am, I'm actually an author of a number of books. Got a few of them around here, actually. Let's see, book on the Stone of Destiny. Uh, this one was about the Mayan prophecy for the end of the age, which is happening now, actually. But they're talking about 2012. There was an importance to that date, which we go into here, but we are actually living through what I would call the apocalypse. And I've been doing a number of lectures recently on this whole subject of the apocalypse, the revelation of St. John. But today I want to do something rather different, kind of been in the news a bit, and I think it's important, not just for discussing current affairs, but people like myself who research into sort of religious affairs, we really have to be very, very careful. And so I've called this story, or this lecture, the Da Vinci Affair, a serious warning to all authors, myself included. Now, what's this all about? Well, do you remember this book, the Da Vinci Code? I'm sure you do. It was one of the biggest bestsellers ever. It's published in 2003. And from being a moderately successful author of offbeat fiction, its author Dan Brown was catapulted into the Rich League. Now, I'm sure you've all heard about this and about the Da Vinci Code, and there were Da Vinci tours in London and elsewhere. It was not just in the English language, but all over the world. It was translated into God knows how many languages, and it created a huge furore at the time, and of course made its author very wealthy in the process. So now Dan Brown is back in the news, but for all the wrong reasons. Now, last year, and I'm not gossiping here, I just want to bring us up to date. Last year, privately and without any publicity, he got divorced. However, now he is back in the news. It seems his ex-wife, Blythe, is suing him over the divorce settlement. More on that later. We don't yet know what this was, that's the divorce settlement. But given that he is, or was, one of the richest authors of all time, it's likely to have been a lot. Now, this is not the first time that Dan Brown has been dragged into a courtroom. I don't know if you remember this, but there was a famous case where he was being sued for plagiarism, actually in the British courts. And we're going to go into something about that now. In 2006, he was sued for plagiarism regarding the Da Vinci Code. The action was taken by two authors, Michael Bagent and Richard Lee, who claimed he had stolen the plot theme from their own 1982 bestseller, The Holy Blood and Holy Grail. Court actions for plagiarism are unusual and rarely have positive outcomes. The authors sued not only Brown himself, but also his publishers, who by strange coincidence were also their own. I mean, that was one of the extraordinary things about this. And I knew quite a bit about what was going on. I've been involved with the same publishers myself in the past. And it did cause a huge stir that these authors were not only suing Dan Brown, this almost cultural icon by this time, but also their own publishers. That's pretty much unheard of. But they did. So, unlike the Da Vinci Code, the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, which I'm going to call THBHG from now on, is in the category of non-fiction. The two authors wrote it in partnership with a third author, Henry Lincoln, who did not take part in the court action. I should stress that although there were 3 authors for this book, The Holy Blood and Holy Grail, it was only 2 of them that decided they were going to sue Dan Brown. The 3rd author, for reasons of his own, and I'm sure he could see that this was not going to end well, said, leave me out of it. So it was down to those 2. I presume that had they been successful, he would not have benefited. I don't know. He would not have been awarded damages because he hadn't sued. But, he probably thought, well, I've got enough. I don't need to go down this risky pathway of suing a famous and popular author. It was first published in 1982. That's The Holy Blood and Holy Grail. And therefore, over 20 years before Dan Brown's novel, it too was a massive bestseller, at least in terms of non-fiction. It had made all 3 authors millionaires, and it's still in print. Now, this is a good point to make. This wasn't a couple of ne'er-do-well authors who are taking a punt, a chance that they might be able to get a few dollars off this wealthy author. And if they lose, they've got nothing to lose. This is how these things usually are. You have some impoverished person living in a garret who sues perhaps a musician for copyright. Says, you've stolen my lyrics, or you've stolen my theme, my tune. I demand a share in the royalties from this huge #1 hit, and give me the money. And very often when these cases come up, if there is anything in the case that's being brought, they'll be quietly paid off, with a sum, and it might be £100,000 or dollars, maybe less, maybe more, and so usually if a case like this comes up, it's settled out of court. Nobody really hears about it, and that's that. Well, this was very high profile. These were rich authors themselves, millionaires, and they were suing this even richer author for plagiarism, for stealing their work. DHBHG is an adventure story where the authors themselves seek to unravel a mystery surrounding a small French village called Rennes-le-Château. This village had long been the subject of speculation concerning how a 19th century priest had come into enough money to carry out a series of building programs. From poverty, he had suddenly become rich. Had he found a buried treasure? Now, this is a subject that was already being discussed long before even this Holy Blood and Holy Grail was published. There had already been pamphlets and books published, mostly in French, of course, and it had been the subject of a TV document, a series of TV, I think there were actually 3 in all, TV documentaries by the 3rd author, Henry Lincoln, who had picked up on this while in France and had researched and found, what is going on here with this little village, Rennes-le-Château, and how come this priest was rich? What had they found? What had he found? Had it been a treasure? Was it the treasure of the Knights Templars? Was it the treasure of the from Jerusalem that had been brought to Rennes-le-Château, and it had been brought from Jerusalem to Rome at the time of Titus when he sacked Rome? And we know that that's true. Had this treasure then been taken from Rome to France, during the time of the fall of the Roman Empire, and when New Kingdom was rising up in France? These were the kind of speculations that had been going on. But the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail was going to take this into an entire new direction. Now, although I've never met either Bagent, Lee, or Lincoln, our paths did cross like ships in the night. I was present at what was intended to be the launch of HBHG, I think in 1981. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was 1981. This took place in a hall in what was then the YWCA, that's the Young Women's Christian Association building. And this building, of course, now is the luxurious Bloomsbury Hotel in London, not far from the junction of Tottenham Court Road and Oxford Street, the road that leads going on to the British Museum. Like most people, I think, I had come along to see what news Henry Lincoln had concerning the treasure supposedly discovered by Berenger Saunier, the priest of Rennes-le-Château. So I would stress here that the star at that time was Henry Lincoln. He was the man who had presented these TV documentaries, which had caused a massive stir in themselves, you know, big audiences, bigger than the BBC was certainly expecting, as people wanted to know what was the secret about this treasure trove that seemed to have been found. And he connected it with certain paintings by Poussin in the Louvre. There were some documents which had been discovered and mysteriously disappeared. There were question marks over the whole issue about this priest. How had he had the money to carry out building programs, not only renovating the church, which he did in a most extraordinary way. I've been there, I've seen it. It's a very peculiar place. But he built a little sort of tower. I think they call it Tour Magdalene, which kind of overlooks, it's up on a hilltop, of course, and it's overlooking a plain with vineyards and fantastic views. And he had his library in there, I believe. And he built a house for himself and his housekeeper. So what was going on here? How had this man come by this money? And that's what we wanted to know. Had they found now the treasure? Was there a clue, a further clue to what had been discovered? And that's why the room was packed in there, people waiting to see what Henry Lincoln and his associates had to say about further discoveries. However, the meeting turned out to be a damp squib. Because the book was not yet available, I don't know why, I think maybe still had some work to do on it, or they wanted to publish it on a specific day. I think it might have been something like the 23rd of January or something, I don't remember now. But the book was not available, so the three authors were unwilling to divulge anything that we didn't already know. Their message was, wait until January and the publication of the book. Can you imagine how frustrating that was? Later I attended one or two other conferences where Michael Bagent was a guest speaker. However, we didn't meet then either. Later still, the Freemasonic magazine, and Michael Bagent and I think Richard Lee as well were Freemasons. And Michael Bagent was the editor of a Freemasonry magazine. So this magazine, which he edited, published a scathing review of one of my own books, The New Jerusalem. And I have to say, I was rather surprised about that, because this particular book goes into the whole question about Sir Christopher Wren and the rebuilding of London in 1666. So a lot of subject areas which ought to have been of interest, I thought, to Freemasons, because Christopher Wren, of course, was the last Grand Master of the Freemasons before it all went through a big reform. Now, I'm not a Mason myself. I've never had any connections with Freemasonry. I'll stress that. But I have researched a little bit about them obliquely in connection with other books that I've written, where I've needed to know something about that. But I'm not a Freemason. Make that very clear. Maybe that's why they didn't want to give a good review to my book. I don't know. That was pretty much our only encounter, although I did once see a picture of him, that's Michael Bagent, sitting at a desk on which was placed another of my books, The Holy Kingdom. How have I got that here? Let me have a look. Yes, this book here, The Holy Kingdom, which was published in 1998. Um, and I think it was actually a video. I can't remember what it was about now. I was talking to Michael Bagent, and he was talking about his researches about something. And this book was actually sitting on his table. So I know that he knew about me, and he knew about at least some of my research. I'm not at all accusing him of any kind of plagiarism. I'm just saying that that was kind of an interesting connection, because we never actually met. And more on that later. Right. Now, Bagent and Lee's action for plagiarism went to the High Court in London. However, they lost their case and were required to pay over £3 million in costs. That's, I think, including the case itself, and then they appealed it. So that actually pushed the price up from about 2 million to 3 million. Yeah, these barristers don't come cheap, do they? Lee died in 2007 from heart trouble. I don't know exactly what his heart trouble was, but he died from heart trouble. Though unmarried, he was the brother of astrologer and psychologist Lynn Green, and she presumably inherited very little, if anything. I'd be interested to know about that. I mean, I had actually read a couple of her books. There's one about Saturn, A New Look on an Old Devil, I think it's called, and it's about what's called a Saturn return. But I've dropped astrology. I'm not interested in it anymore, so I'm not going to say any more on that. But I'd be interested to know if she was left anything. It's none of my business, but if anyone knows, I would be curious. Bagent, who died in 2013 from a brain hemorrhage, was survived by a wife and children. Now, by all accounts, he's a really nice guy. I know people who knew him, and it's desperately tragic, really, what happened to his family, because he'd had to sell his house to pay off this massive debt. His share would have been $1.5 million, which would have been worth more back in at the time, what we're talking about 2006, than it would be now in 2020. So, you know, he ended up having to rent a house, you know, with his family, his poor wife, you know. I feel very, very sorry for them. Anyway, however, as a consequence of Dan Brown's lawsuit, they had lost their house and were left in dire straits. Henry Lincoln, though older than either of them, was not party to the legal action, as I said. And he is still alive, although he's much older than that. I think he must be getting on for 90, if it may be more than that, and lives in Rennes-le-Château, of all places. So what went wrong for Lee and Bagent? Well, now, the secret that the trio had been unwilling to divulge during the meeting at the YWCA turned out to be the very theme Dan Brown used as the centerpiece of his plot for the Da Vinci Code, viz., that Jesus had married Mary Magdalene, and they had had at least one son. This son, they contended, was Barabbas, the man who in the Bible is set free by Pontius Pilate instead of Jesus. So I want you to think on that for a minute. I mean, we know that there was Mary Magdalene. She's mentioned in the Bible quite a lot. I mean, some say that she was the prostitute or the woman taken in adultery that Jesus saved from the mob. I don't know if that's true, but she was certainly a friend of his, and it seems pretty likely that she was actually the Mary, the sister of Martha and Mary, the ladies who had a house in the village of Bethany, just not far from Jerusalem, where Jesus stayed quite often. And they had the brother Lazarus, who Jesus resurrected from the dead. So he's closely associated with Mary Magdalene or Magdala or wherever she came from. And there's lots of speculation about her. But as far as I know, prior to this book, people had not been saying that she was the wife of Jesus, that he was married. A pretty contentious argument. which they made. And I'm not going to go into their argument for saying that, but this is what they were claiming. And they were also claiming that Barabbas, and you know the story in the Bible where Pilate says to the people, it's Passover, you can make a choice like which person I'm going to release. You can either have Jesus, this man who claims to be King of the Jews and the Messiah, or you can have this other man, a robber bandit guy called Barabbas. And the crowd shouts out, Barabbas, Barabbas, Barabbas. And so Pilate washes his hands and says, on your own heads be it. And they say, well, on our heads be it, and on our children and children's children. So they take the curse on themselves, and I leave it to you to think whether that is what's caused the terrible problems throughout history that the Jewish people have suffered. Maybe you would think I'm a complete idiot for even thinking that. But this is actually one idea that people have, and I suspect it's not so far from the truth. You don't go around sentencing Jesus to death and saying, let it be on my head, with nothing happening. Not if you believe in curses and self-curses. Anyway, that's by the by. Pontius Pilate washed his hands, and according to Bagent, Lee, and Lincoln, Barabbas, the name Abba means father, and Bar can mean son. So Barabbas, son of the father. And so their idea was that Pilate was offering, either you can release the father, which is Jesus, right? Or you can release his son, Barabbas. Which do you want? Now, I find that rather a strange argument, because Jesus was, only about 33. So when this Barabbas would only have been a teenager, he couldn't have been more than 15, it's 16 at the most. Would he have been an important bandit at that age? It's stretching a point. But anyway, so they claimed that the family of Jesus escaped to France. In other words, there's Barabbas and Mary Magdalene. I think maybe they later said that Jesus went with them too, but I'm not quite sure. It's a while since I read that book. The Jesus bloodline was supposedly preserved in the Merovingian dynasty of long-haired Frankish kings. Now, if you haven't heard of the Merovingians before, I think few of us had before the Da Vinci Code, or before actually the Holy Blood and Holy Grail brought them to mind. But they were kings of the Franks, and I think there was a Childeric, and he had a son called Clovis, Clovis, which later becomes Clovis, and this Clovis becomes Louis. And this Clovis, or Clovis, it should be pronounced, because a V in Latin is usually pronounced as a U. So this Clovis, he's actually baptized in Reims, or Rheims. You can go and see Rheims Cathedral. It talks all about this, about the baptism of Clovis, and how that's thereafter all the kings of France were crowned in Reims. And that's where Joan of Arc had to drag the unwilling Dauphin to have him crowned, so she could drive out the English from France. So, Reims is a really important place in France. And I've written a lot about that in another of my books, plug, called Magi, which you can, at least you can get a Kindle version on Amazon. But anyway, the Merovingians had long hair. And later on, they were pushed off the throne by Charlemagne. And you had the next dynasty that came in. So this was an earlier dynasty, and they're claiming here that the Merovingian dynasty was descended from Jesus himself. A pretty wild claim, you might think. I would think so. But that was kind of the big secret that they wouldn't tell us about when we were at the YWCA for that first meeting. Now, of course, from a Christian standpoint, such ideas are utter heresy. For while there undoubtedly is a Grail legend, there is no evidence that Jesus was ever married to Mary Magdalene or indeed anyone else. The argument that Saint Grail, meaning Holy Grail, can be written Saint Grail, blood royal, it proves nothing. Yeah, you move that G. It doesn't prove that it's a line descended from Jesus. In the legends, the Grail is nearly always the cup used at the Last Supper. It does have mystical significance, but nowhere is it implied it is the womb of Mary Magdalene or anyone else. I mean, that's another. I'm not sure if they wrote that in the Holy Blood and Holy Grail or if it was in their follow-up book, The Messianic Legacy, or perhaps some other authors have certainly taken up that feminist position that Mary Magdalene, her womb is the Grail, and that's the important thing, this female line, and so on. I think Dan Brown worked very much along those lines with his Da Vinci Code. Again, it's a long time since I read that book, and I have no intention of ever reading it again. Dreadfully badly written, in my opinion. But there is this whole thing. Oh yeah, the Holy Grail is really talking about Mary, the divine feminine, and it's her womb that Jesus planted his seed in, and therefore this bloodline is descended. Well, I'm sorry, but that is total heresy from the point of view of practicing Christians, and it has nothing to do with the Grail legend as such, where it's nearly always as a cup, and it's a cup that's related to either the Last Supper, or Joseph of Arimathea is said to have taken this cup and collected some drops of blood from Jesus, bleeding. Of course, Joseph of Arimathea is the man who was charged with taking down the body of Jesus from the cross, pulling the nails out and carrying his body down from the cross, and had it buried in his own tomb. And he was a member of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, and he seems to have been very close to the family. In fact, it's pretty clear that he was the head of the family. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had the authority to bring that body down. And we'll talk a bit more about that later. But anyway, the only time I've seen the Grail not talked about in terms of it being a cup, either the one that Joseph collected the blood in or the cup that was used at the Last Supper, is in much later story of Parsifal, where Wolfram von Eschenbach, the German Meistersinger, he wrote his story of the Grail, and he makes out that the Grail is a stone. But apart from that, it's nearly always a cup. So the Jesus bloodline is not what King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table searched for. Remember, the Grail story comes in the Arthurian legends, and it's the kind of last part of the Arthurian story where the knights the Grail appears at the court of King Arthur and feeds the knights with their favourite food, and it appears and then it disappears, and they go off in this search for this extraordinary cup, which they recognise that it's the only thing that can restore Britain, which has become a wilderness, a wasteland. But if they can find the Grail, then the wasteland can be restored. That's what it talks about in the Grail legend. But there's nothing there about Mary Magdalene. The Jesus bloodline is not what King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table searched for. They were looking for a spiritual sustenance from the Grail. The Grail keepers, although holy, were just custodians. So there was a family associated with the Grail, but they were the custodians, and they claimed descent from the Fisher King, they call him, who in turn is descended from Joseph of Arimathea. This is what the story in the Grail legends is all about, if you want to read them. There's nothing in there about Jesus, and there's nothing in there about Mary Magdalene. So where did Bajent and Lee find their story? Perhaps the devil of Rennes-le-Château, who supports the holy water stoup by the door, whispered it into their ears. Now I find this horrific statue here. You go through the door into the little church of Rennes-le-Château, and there he is, and he's actually holding up the water stoup, because when you go into a Catholic church, the normal thing to do would be to dip your fingers into the holy water and cross yourself with it. This is a minor blessing. They call it a sacramental in Catholicism. But to have the holy water being supported by this diabolical figure, I mean, I've never heard of anyone doing anything like that before. This was part of the renovations to the church carried out by this priest, Berenger Saunière. Very peculiar. So did he whisper it in their ear? The rumour that I have heard from the lips of someone who did know Michael Bajent and has also investigated the story of Rennes-le-Château mystery for many years is that they made it up. They made up the story of the Jesus and Mary Magdalene marriage. Perhaps over a glass of wine, they're thinking, well, perhaps Mary Magdalene married Jesus. Yeah, that's a good idea, isn't it? I don't know how it happened, but that's kind of what I was told. And this is not surprising, as most of what is written about Rennes-le-Château is also a hoax. I hope you realise that people have come out of the woodwork now, French men talking about how they had invented the so-called Prieuré de Sion, which is talked about by Bajent, Lee and Lincoln, and also in the Holy Blood and Holy Grail, and in many other books. They talk about the secretive order of the Prieuré de Sion. And these French guys have actually indicated how they falsified documents. They made them themselves as a bit of fun. They were having a hoax. And also, prior to this, Lee was a fiction author. Okay, he wasn't a very well-known or popular fiction author. In fact, I think he mostly wrote short stories. But he was a fiction author, not a non-fiction researcher. So maybe the original idea, and this is what I'm thinking, maybe you might disagree with me, but maybe the original idea was to write a novel based on their discussions. And I can well understand this, as an author myself. You always think, now how should I present this material? So I can imagine that they might have thought, well, should we write a novel about this? This could be fun, couldn't it? And then they thought, well, actually, we should actually do this as a non-fiction book, because I think, we got enough material here, we've searched it deeply and we've pressed into this. Okay, it's speculative, but who cares? People are going to enjoy it and they'll enjoy reading it and it'll be fun and enlightening, etc., etc., etc. So they probably decided, I think, yeah, we won't do fiction. We'll do it as a non-fiction. And they were working with Henry Lincoln by this time anyway, and he was, obviously more interested in doing a non-fiction book, which maybe he had ideas of doing further documentaries. I don't know. But anyway, that's how it came out. It came out as a non-fiction. So now, Dan Brown's defense. Now you've got to remember, there they were suing Dan Brown for plagiarism, right? Now he had done what I think maybe they had originally thought about doing, which is writing a novel based on this material. And the great thing about a novel is you can write what you like. If anyone says, well, that never happened, Jesus never married Mary, well, it's only a story, it's only a novel, come on. You've got much more protection, haven't you? In that way, you can write what you like in a novel. Whereas if you're writing non-fiction, you have got to be, your facts have to be right. Your interpretation, that's another matter. You can interpret the same facts in many different ways, but it should be that the facts that you're basing your thesis on are sound. So, when they were suing Michael Bajent and Richard Lee, were suing Dan Brown, they maybe thought, well, you know, we were going to write this as a novel. This bloke's come along and he's stolen our idea. Anyway, his defense mostly rested on the testimony that he had not even read the Holy Blood and Holy Grail until after he had written his own book. He claimed the research for his book had been carried out by his wife, Blythe, and THBHG being only one of many books that she consulted. Right? So his defense is saying, well, you know, I don't do the research, my wife does the research. And she's very good at it. She can organise all the stuff, and then she gives me this material, and I write a novel. I mean, it seems pretty strange to me as an author that you would work in that way, but you can't. You know, none of us have been there. We don't know. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's exactly what happened. This seems surprising, as he had named his chief villain Lee Teabing. That's in the Holy Blood and Holy in the Da Vinci Code. Lee, of course, is Richard Lee's surname, while Teabing is an anagram of Bagent. Blythe did not testify, so she was not under oath to either confirm or deny this testimony. That's the testimony that she did the research. So we've got this strange thing that he's calling his chief villain, Lee Teabing, as an homage, one might think, towards Lee and Bagent. And yet he's not read their book at the time he's writing his book. And in fact, it's his wife who's read the book, but only as one of many others. So, you know, it's an original story, nothing to look at, nothing to see here. I think if it had been just that, he would have lost. But there was something else. However, Brown's best defense was simply that he was writing fiction while they were writing fact. And you cannot copyright ideas, only the form into which they are put. So Bagent and Lee's lawyer tried to make a case that the plot structure of both books indicated direct usage, but this did not stick, because ultimately, he's writing fiction and they were writing fact. Had Bagent and Lee admitted, now this is an important bit, had Bagent and Lee admitted that Holy Blood and Holy Grail was a hoax, that it was fiction and not fact, they might have won. However, it seems to me that pride got in the way, for to make this admission would be to destroy their book's credibility, and with it their own reputations as esoteric researchers. Now, I don't know if you grasp that, but I'm suggesting here that they came up with the idea, oh, Jesus married Mary Magdalene. That's obvious. That must be that's what it is. That's the big secret. Yeah, Jesus and Mary were married and they had kids. And those kids went to France, or at least one of them did, and had founded a dynasty which married into the royal dynasty of the Merovingians. Perhaps the Merovingians were that descended line. And from there, it's been perpetuated right up to the present time, where there are people who claim to be of that lineage. And this is the big secret that everyone's been keeping. And this is what the Holy Grail story is all about. They'd had that idea, and they could have written that as a fictional book. Well, they decided, no, this research is so important and we want it to be treated as important. We want it to be treated as fact, not fiction. So they wrote it up in Holy Blood and Holy Grail as a closely argued book, taking us through time and looking at various bits of evidence, some of it a bit shaky, it has to be said, linking them with the Templars and the whole Rennes le Chateau thing and everything leading right up to the present. Well, had they written it as the fiction, I think Dan Brown, well, he probably wouldn't have even tried to write his book because he'd know that that was plagiarism. But he was covered by the fact that they had not done this. They had written their book as fact. And so he was entitled to say, I'm writing a story based on that fact. You can't copyright ideas. The idea that Jesus married Mary, maybe they had that first, I don't know. But it's in other books as well, not just theirs. I was writing a novel. And on that basis, the judge dismissed the case. So Lee and Bagent, who had been millionaires, died impoverished at the relatively young ages of 65 and 64, respectively. There was no need for this. As a result of the success. So now, how did they get it so wrong, these two guys? Well, let's look into that. Really, there was no need for this. As a result of the success of the Da Vinci Code, their own books were enjoying a renaissance. Had they accepted the situation, they could have enjoyed this windfall. Now, it wasn't just the Holy Blood and Holy Grail. They'd written other books like the Messianic Prophecy, which they also co-authored with Henry Lincoln, and a number of other books. And all of these, I mean, especially obviously the Holy Blood and Holy Grail, had come back, were being bought in large numbers. Not as much as the Da Vinci Code, it's true, but they were doing all right. They were getting a nice little bonus. And most authors would have been quite happy with that. So why weren't they? What went wrong? Well, something drove them to take an action that all of their friends, as well as their publishers, advised them was foolhardy. And why was this? In my opinion, they were driven to financial suicide because they had falsified the story of Jesus and thereby brought a curse on themselves. Now, perhaps that needs a little explanation, that if you start playing around with the story of Jesus in the Bible, you're putting yourself outside of the umbrella protection that goes over Christians. I know if you're not a Christian you think that's nonsense, but there is a psychic or, how can I put it, a spiritual barrier protection that can stop you from being attacked so easily by various demonic forces. But when you go against that and you start falsifying, particularly falsifying the Bible. I mean, I remember even reading a guy who had written his own gospel. He'd sort of seen, I think, maybe that the Bible's the all-time bestseller. So, I'll write one of those then. I mean, this is crazy, but it happens all the time, unfortunately. People keep reinventing and rewriting and producing fresh takes on things, and it's not always justified. I know I write books exploring these different avenues as well, and I have done. But there's a difference between those who are searching for truth and who are genuinely on a path, you could call it, and those who are seeking to make some cash, to put it bluntly. When you do that, you can put yourself outside of any protection and you become very vulnerable. Now, the real story of the Holy Grail is part of the Arthurian cycle of stories. It appears miraculously at Arthur's court of the Round Table on Whit Sunday. That's the Grail appears. In many ways, this is a reenactment of the events recorded in the Bible, in the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 2, 1-4. And in that, if you read that, if you open your Bible and read that, you'll see the apostles were gathered together in the same room where they'd had the Last Supper, when the Holy Ghost descends on them and as tongues of fire on each of their heads, and they suddenly have abilities they didn't have before. For example, they're able to speak in tongues. Now, what that means is not going, oh, but God, oh, you know, sort of random sounds. It actually means they suddenly have a knowledge of foreign languages that they didn't know before. And they're able to talk to people who previously they couldn't, you know, converse with because they didn't know their language. But suddenly they seem to have this facility of tongues, tongue glossa, meaning a language. So they're able to develop these powers, which are referred to in Christianity as the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And there are other ones too, besides tongues. There are gifts of healing, for instance, gifts of prophecy. There are other gifts. And suddenly the apostles had these gifts. And another important gift that they receive is kind of courage. You know, they're really frightened prior to this. After it, they're not. They go outside and start preaching and taking on the world. So this is kind of what the Holy Grail appearing in King Arthur's court is all about. Is you need to reconnect to the truth, to the essence of Christianity, which is symbolized by the Holy Grail and is actually the Holy Ghost. And if you don't know what the Holy Ghost is and what I'm talking about here, I recommend you watch a video of mine called The Logos Doctrine, which is on this same channel, so you should be able to find it, where I go into that in some depth, and I'm not going to digress into that now. But this is what is happening, and you know, in the story we're told it's that in the King Arthur story, the Grail appears on Whit Sunday when they're having their plenary meeting, and of course that is again a reference back to the first Whitsun. Whitsun is when this Holy Ghost came down on the apostles. It's 50 days after Easter. So we got that connection there. And the apostles were gathered in Right. The quest for the Grail is really a search for the Holy Ghost. There's nothing to do with Rennes le Chateau or any mythical marriage of Jesus or any of the other nonsense in THBHG or Da Vinci Code. It is a Welsh story connecting with the legend of Joseph of Arimathea. And if you don't know that legend, then the story goes that Joseph came to Britain and converted the British. He came actually from Rome with the daughter of King Caradog and founded the first church, which was actually in South Wales. It's not in Somerset, not in Glastonbury in Somerset. And again, I've written a lot about this. I've got a copy of the book here. I haven't got one here, but anyway, the Blood of Avalon. I'm going to come to that anyway in a minute, but I've written a lot about that. And the Grail family that's spoken of in the Arthurian legends, that you have the Fisher King, and the whole story actually of the Grail quest is about restoring the land, which has become a wasteland. And in order to do that, they've got to find the Grail. That is, reconnect with the spiritual blessings of God, spiritual blessings that have come from the Holy Ghost. That's what it's all about. And the family who have been preserving this is the Grail family, and they are descended from Joseph of Arimathea. And Percival and Galahad, these heroes that go and find the Grail eventually, they are lost members or knights who have been adopted into that family. So there is a family connection, but it's not what they're telling you in Holy Blood and Holy Grail or in the Da Vinci Code. Those books are nonsense, and you should, if you've got them in your library, get rid of them. They're not good for you. Anyway, so how did Bagent, Lee and Lincoln get it all so wrong? I think the answer is this guy. You maybe remember I showed you a picture of him. He's guarding the gateway or the doorway into the church at Rennes le Chateau, and he has on his back the water stoup that supposedly has the holy water in it that you're supposed to cross yourself with. I mean, are you crossing yourself with a demonic presence by doing that? You know, I mean, this is an extraordinary figure, and it amazes me that the Catholic Church would allow such an image to be placed underneath the water stoup. I know they might say, well, he's forcing the devil to carry the blessing. It shows that the devil's being oppressed. But I don't think that at all. I think this is actually a manifestation of some kind of diabolic cult. So the priest, Berenger Saunier, that's the one who supposedly found the treasure and started all this this whole business, was very likely involved in occult practices. His wealth was a reward for making a Faustian pact with the devil. This explains the very strange atmosphere to the little church in Rennes, and of course its devil supporting the holy water stoup. So let me just elaborate on that. A Faustian pact, you've heard of Dr. Faustus, and Mephistopheles turns up. And Faustus he's a very clever man. He's studied all the science that's known in his time, and he wants to go further. And Mephistopheles comes along and says, yeah, I can help you with that. You just have to ask. You have to make a little pact with me, but that's all right. You've got to sell your soul, but you don't believe in that anyway. It's all nonsense, isn't it? So, just sign with your own blood, and we'll make you rich. You'll have the women you want. You'll have fame, all those wonderful things. The blessings of everything that this earth has to offer you. You'll have it all. And Faust thinks, yeah, well, I want knowledge. Oh, yeah. You'll have knowledge. Yes. So he signs the pact with his own blood, but come the day, Mephistopheles comes back to take his soul away. And this is called a Faustian pact. And believe it or not, I mean, this is, you think, well, that's just a stupid story, came out of Germany, Dr. Faustus. Actually, it was modelled on Dr. Dee, who was the astrologer for Queen Elizabeth, but that's another story. Actually, while I think of it, the Dumbledore character, in the Harry Potter legends, he's modelled on Dr. Dee as well, with the long beard. Think about that for a minute. Anyway, this is what happens when you make a Faustian pact. And I think that this priest, Berenger Saunier, did make such a pact. And I don't know how he got the wealth. Maybe he was able to put money on the horses or something. I don't know. But he had this mysterious wealth came to him, but ultimately it comes at a cost. Now, Bagent and Lee were very likely unaware of this as they spread the false story concerning Jesus marrying Mary Magdalene. For Satan, above all else, is a liar. Now, I want to stress that point. Satan is a liar. He tells lies to people. He'll tell you whatever he thinks you want to hear. He'll tell you that Auntie Mabel's just fine up in the spirit realm. Yeah, Auntie Mabel's fine. She's waving hello to you when you go and see a spiritualist church. He'll tell you anything you want to hear, because all he's really interested in is pulling you deeper into the occult. And it usually starts with something very, very simple. Like perhaps going to a spiritualist church, or getting into astrology, or starting to study tarot, or something like this. And it can progress from that into deeper levels of the occult. A classic one, and I'm sorry if this upsets anyone watching this, but Freemasonry has an occult level to it. Most Freemasons you'll ever meet only do the first 3 degrees. They go through little rituals to get there, to do that, and then they meet in their lodges and they go and have dinner together, and I don't know what they talk about. I'm not a Mason myself, so I've not been to one of those meetings. But they don't go beyond that. But some of them do, and they get up to higher degrees and higher levels, and eventually they can find themselves actually discovering that it was not all they thought it was going to be. That there are actually spirit entities controlling this thing, and they're not very nice. So if you're already involved in Freemasonry, I would suggest that you get out of it. Burn your robes, get rid of your apron, junk the books, burn them if possible. Get out of it, because it's not going to do you any good. But that's just my opinion, and you might think, well, I don't know what I'm talking about, so what do I know? But this is the ways that people get drawn into Faustian pacts are many. Witchcraft is another one. It starts off with care for ecology and nature. Yeah, nature's wonderful. We all want nice green fields. We all want the birds to be happy, the animals to be happy, humans to be happy, celebrate the spring and so on. But the reality actually of the old pagan religions was sacrifice, sacrificing animals, and sometimes sacrificing humans. And there are rumors, and I've not pursued this, but I've certainly heard rumors that, particularly in America, a lot of the children who go missing end up being sacrificed on altars to pagan gods by witches. Now, you're going to say, well, that's a calumny, Adrian. How can you say that about our lovely pagan religion? Well, go deeper and you might find out. There are demonic forces working through that. People like this guy here. So if you're involved in that, again, I would say to you, get out of it. You're going to find that when you try to get out of it, you're going to meet nasty occult attacks. And I've written about this in, I've not been a witch myself, but I've been involved in other occult things, and I had a hell of a time when I broke with that. So be aware of this and be ready to ask for help where you can find it. And generally speaking, the place that you'll find it will be with the church. So I think this guy had a lot to do with it. For Satan, above all else, is a liar. In the end, they were driven mad, and their wealth was taken from them. Why do I say they were driven mad? Well, however, this may have been a blessing in disguise. They were driven mad by undertaking this case, taking Dan Brown to trial. I mean, everyone told them. The publishers told them, their friends told them, everyone said, don't do it, you won't win. You haven't got a leg to stand on. But they wouldn't listen. They insisted on pursuing this course. And of course they did. They ended up losing their case and having to pay costs which came to over £3 million. And it bankrupted them. So the real Jesus, Satan's enemy, is first and foremost an exorcist. The Bible confirms this. If we make our peace with him, that's Jesus, even a Faustian pact can be broken. So that's a very important thing to realize, is that you don't have to be bound to this guy. You don't have to be dragged off by Mephistopheles, even if you have made this pact with the devil. We use that expression, don't we, in talking about things that you team up with something that's not very nice. But even if you've done that, you can be freed through Jesus Christ. I know you probably think I'm crazy saying that, but it's true. And that's what the real Grail story is all about. So now Dan Brown too is in hot water. His testimony in court that his wife Blythe had done half the work on the Da Vinci Code left him financially exposed when they divorced in 2019. She presumably received a good settlement. I would think she probably got half the wealth, I would think. But she's now suing him for more. It seems she is accusing him of secretly siphoning off shared assets to spend on a string of mistresses. You can read in this Daily Mail article. Also, that he was secretly working on a lucrative film contract based on the hero of the Da Vinci Code. What's his name? Robert Langdon. And she wants a share of the proceeds. So they're already divorced, right? He's probably thinking, oh, well, I've got her off my back. It's cost me half my money. But I've got a lot left. I'm going to be all right for the rest of my life. And I've got this new contract. I'm going to make loads more money. It's going to be great. And then she finds out, and unfortunately, he'd already started negotiating this while they were still married, or that's what she's claiming anyway. I don't know if it's true. Maybe he's going to contest that in court. I don't know. But then suddenly he's faced with the prospect that maybe half of this lovely new wad of cash that he's going to get from Netflix for his new series is going to go to her. Oh dear, oh dear. You've got to feel sorry for these rich people. It's like Jeff Bezos, his wife, He's lost half his fortune. We're not talking about millions here. We're talking about, I think it's something like 60 billion or something that she got in a payoff, and she's going to get more as well. You can't beat it, can you? I mean, if you can marry someone like that, if you're a lady, and then divorce them, that seems to be the way to find a nice big pot of cash anyway, if nothing else. But I still wouldn't do it. Anyway, so she's accusing him of siphoning off shared assets to spend on a string of mistresses. Also that he was secretly working on a lucrative film contract. I've said all that. She wants to share the proceeds. And this will likely prove to be an expensive action for both of them. Is this his karma for promoting heresy? Could it be the heresy curse striking again? Who knows, but it is a warning for all authors. Now, this, I hope, sets the record straight with all things Holy Grail. And I'm just going to run through a few points here that I think you need to know if you don't know them already. That's the Grail story, has nothing to do with Da Vinci, the Templars, Rennes le Chateau, a 19th century treasure, court cases that bankrupt authors, or anything else of that nature. In truth, what we are looking at is a Welsh story concerning the arrival in Britain of Mary's brother, Joseph of Arimathea, with his family. That's Mary, the mother of Jesus. He may have brought with him the cup of the Last Supper. Now, I should say here that the tradition holds it that the Last Supper was held in a room in his house. Right? He's a wealthy man, a tin trader, they say, or metal trader, who used to come to Britain regularly. And as I think I maybe said earlier, they found ingots of tin off the coast of Phoenicia, which is now Lebanon, and off the coast of Greece too, I think. And the tin, they can test it, and they can find out exactly where it came from, what the mines were, and they were actually in Britain, in Cornwall. So we know that there were people shipping tin and actually also copper and silver and gold from Britain to the Middle East, to the Roman Empire, and before that probably to other empires, in fact certainly to other empires. So the idea that Joseph was a trader who'd been to Britain buying gold or buying tin and copper and then going back and selling it in Judea is not crazy at all, and that would be the source of the family wealth. And of course we have the other tradition, which I've not gone into, and I don't know if it's true at all, that he brought his nephew Jesus with him on at least one occasion. That's why you have Blake's poem, "Did those feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountains green," or something. That's in the song Jerusalem. Shall we build Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land? That's the legend. I don't know if it's true. Doesn't have to be, but certainly the idea that Joseph of Arimathea came and brought Christianity to Britain is one of the central theme or central religious event in our nation's history. And he went to Wales. Anyway, so we have his family connection here. And he may have brought with him the cup of the Last Supper. Well, if it was his house and his cup, why not? But the story is really concerned with connecting with the true but much misunderstood source of grace, which is the Holy Ghost. Now, if you don't know more about this, about the real quest for the Holy Grail, then I recommend you read my book, Blood of Avalon. You can see the cover there. It's published by Watkins, London publishers, and you can buy it from Amazon. Not very expensive. But if you want to know the truth about the Holy Grail in Britain and the Grail legend, the Grail family, and how that bloodline has descended to the present, it's all in there. I've researched it in depth. Based on detailed research into Welsh records and also the history of Britain following the Norman invasions, you'll have a better understanding of the whole subject. However, the deepest truth is not contained in any book. It's in your own heart. I would urge you to turn away from all occult practices, especially witchcraft. Look for the Holy Grail by making your own connection with Jesus. It is my firm belief that we, in our times, are living in the end days. We do not have long before we will be judged. Therefore, make sure that on your forehead is the mark of God and not that of the beast. Now, I'm talking there about, in the book of Revelation, they talk about the mark of the beast. You've read it, 666, the mark of the beast. But earlier on in that book, there's also the mark of God, that God tells his angels to go out and mark his elect on their foreheads with another mark, so that they won't be subjected to the things that are going to happen to all the people who are marked with the mark of the beast. You might think, well, this is just nonsense, We're scientists, aren't we, Adrian? Yeah, we know more than the stupidity of the Bible and these people who think that there are ghosts and think there are marks of beasts and so on. But just look around you at what's happening in the world now. Just look around you. If this isn't the end of days, when is? I put it to you, that we are living in the book of Revelation. And I've actually been making lectures. I think we're up to about chapter 8, 9, somewhere like that. We're going to be going into the whole mark of the beast thing in not that far ahead. Be a couple of lectures before that, I think. But we're getting there. And I shall tell you exactly what that's all about. I'm not going to do so now, but I will tell you exactly what that's all about. So for now, I want you to take this on board and recognize that we're all here. We're all fallen souls on this planet. This planet is a fallen planet. And there is a spirit realm to this planet. It contains all sorts of demons. The prince of demons we call Satan. And also there is the Holy Ghost that has come in here with Jesus, that is creating something different. But we're not fully there yet. They've not been put back in the pit. The bad guys are going to be put in the pit. That's what's in the book of Revelation. But in the meantime, we're in the midst of a war. And I have to tell you, it's not just this planet even. The whole star systems which have been taken over by a rebellion. And I'm not going to go into that, but we are part of the battleground for what is going on with that whole fallen angel business, which actually took place higher up than this originally. We're the foot soldiers in the trenches. And we have to decide which side we're on. And I know which side I'm on. Yeah. I'm wearing my Jerusalem cross, which I bought actually in Cairo, believe it or not, and had blessed by a patriarch in the cathedral there, the Coptic cathedral, St. George's. I know which side I'm on. You've got to decide which side you're going to be on, because it's your soul. not mine. So I hope this has clarified a few things for you, and let's say you maybe enjoyed it, but it's a lesson for us all, and a lesson to all authors, myself included, to be very careful what we write in our books. Thank you very much.